society.
In 2003, I went to prison along with the former deputy from here, Joe Higgins, Claire Daly and Mick Barry, who's here with the Anti-Austerity Alliance, and I have to say 24 other people from around Dublin in particular. And the reason we were imprisoned was because there was a High Court case which issued an injunction against protests which took place against the county councils for refusing to take bins. Why were they refusing to take bins? Because people had boycotted the charges and had said, we're not paying this charge. And the fundamental reason for not paying the charge, very similar to the campaign against the water charges, Minister, was that if we start paying a charge on an essential service, it will be privatised, and when it is privatised, it becomes the possession of greedy profiteers who behave unscrupulously and will push up these charges to the sky's the limits. And that's exactly what has happened all these years later. I'm sitting here, an older woman, with the memory of that and all of those people who went to prison. Most of them women, by the way. I think there was 15 women in the Docas Centre alongside me at the time. And we were adamant, and it's on the record, that we were fighting this to stop the privatisation of an essential service. That service was introduced in this city and in other cities in the late 1890s because of the spread of cholera, a very infectious disease which spread throughout the cities because there was no refuse service. So the local authorities brought in a refuse service, collected the bins, it was charged for through rates and later on through different forms of taxation. Now I want to go back all that way and say this is where the real problem that we're facing today started. It is the legacy of neoliberal government, most of that under Fianna Fáil, I have to say, because they've been in power for most of the time. But your government have continued it, the last government continued it, and somebody has to call a halt. And for that reason, I've got a bundle of letters here in front of me, and last week I raised this under questions to the Taoiseach. And Enda Kenny didn't seem to know what was going on. And I have to say, yesterday morning or the morning before when it was raised again, he still didn't seem to understand what's going on. He doesn't seem to understand that when you put a 200% increase on an essential utility bill on ordinary households, you may as well crucify them because they find it so difficult to meet those demands. And I brought a series of emails with me here today, which Taoiseach had asked me to send. I've sent him dozens. And I don't get any reply. I don't get a reply back saying, shock horror, Deputy, that's awful, I didn't realise what was going on. I might get the odd acknowledgement, but people are emailing me on a regular basis every day with the actual statistics which show my bin charges will go, and people calculate these things. They work out the pay by weight, they work out the annual charge because they are working on a budget, on a very tight budget, and a lot of people cannot afford the increases. So you're looking at charges going from 180 to 330, from 82 to 216, from 20 a month to 34 a month. This is unsustainable. And what we are doing here in Anti-Austerity Alliance People Before Probably, we put a private member's motion which we will debate next Tuesday on the floor of the Dail, and that is asking for you, Minister, to put an amendment to the statutory instrument that you were about to sign or recently signed when the pay by weight came in, and that amendment should state two things. One, that the service charge or the annual standing charge should be linked to CPI and CPI only, that they cannot increase it by 100 and 200%. And my very last point, that the minimum that you put on the pay by weight should be the maximum, because you know how offensive that will be to people with disabilities and people who have particular needs because of large families.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Desi Ellis, thank you.
Minister, at present we have a major problem with illegal dumping throughout the country, and we warned many years ago that privatisation would add to that problem. That is why we fought tooth and nail to retain services in the hands of local authorities. We now see a cartel fixing prices and putting the two fingers up to us all and the consumer. It is now quite clear beyond any reasonable doubt that there will be substantial increases in collection fees from July the 1st. This is in spite of repeated government assurances that 87% of households will see a reduction in their waste bills, 8.5% will see no change, and a small number of households may see a higher bill. But with proper awareness and segregation, The potential is for everyone to see a reduced bill as promised by the previous Minister, Alan Kelly. In a statement, Minister, you said pay by weight would mean that the majority of households will be charged in a new, fairer and more transparent way for the collection of their waste. By any standard, all of these promises have been broken, even before the bills take effect on the 1st of July. Not only that, but the legislation contained mandatory minimum fees to be applied, 11 cents per kilo for black bin waste and 6 cents per kilo for compost bin waste. This has been totally disregarded, with all waste management companies charging at least 3 times that amount. So from the very start, the bin companies have not engaged with the spirit of the legislation, and now today Minister Fitzgerald said that the government would take a dim view if it saw clear evidence of abuse. And if there was, we would introduce regulations to ensure that that doesn't happen. Well, I think we are gone well beyond that. If you have to chase and police these companies even before they start, the only option is to start again and stop these charges, which are only having the effect of putting already hard-pressed families under further duress and poverty. Waste collection companies are charging fees that far exceed the existing standard charge. That in one instance amounted to a 130% increase made under the guise of the pay-by-weight legislation. Europe is encouraging us all to recycle, and rightly so. But that can only be done through educating people. Pay-by-weight and service charges is now the new trick to add substantially to the price that we are already being charged. Large families, particularly those on low pay and social welfare, will be hit worse, as will senior citizens on pensions, already struggling, but who recycle and put out very little rubbish. This legislation does not seem to benefit anyone except the cartel-like pricing system of the bin companies. And it's now time to reassess the privatisation agenda and put a stop to this blatant attempt at gouging ordinary people.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Deputy Fergus O'Dell.
First of all, that I welcome the Minister. I welcome his commitment to meet with the people, the industry itself, and to deal effectively and firmly with the issues that are raised here. The first significant issue is the question of profiteering. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind at all, from calls I'm getting and emails up and down my constituency in Louth, that there is significant profiteering ongoing. One family, a family of 4, which according to the information which was given to the Minister, there should be a reduction in their waste charges. They've been told this morning that their €312 will rise to 608. And they're going to be charged twice as much for taking away less waste than they ever had. That is absolutely appalling and unacceptable. Some companies clearly are profiteering and are using this and abusing the privilege of having their licence to collect waste. It is unfair and it is unacceptable. Secondly, the question of fairness. There isn't fairness in the present proposals, because notwithstanding the fact that we're being told that there will be something like 74,000 households will be the only households that will have an increase in their charges. That, I believe, is absolutely untrue. But for those that do have an increase, and that those particularly who are larger families, and that's in the statistics which we've been given, there is no fairness, there is no equity, there is no... it is absolutely unacceptable. And the point I want to make, Minister, is that I think you should suspend this process until we have clarity, particularly in relation to poorer families, families who have children under 3. A waste waiver scheme is what is absolutely needed, where hardship is dealt with, where there's fairness, where there's equity, where there's consistency. And I know that my constituents who do not have the funds, who will not be able to afford the 300 increase to 600, they will have no choice but to dump illegally. And I agree with my colleague opposite that there will be a significant increase in illegal dumping and fly tipping, and that is absolutely unacceptable. Also, there's been no consultation by the companies. They're telling people now, with 2 weeks to go, and they've no choice to look at alternate service providers. They've no choice. They have no time to test a new system. So if and when it is ever reintroduced this, Minister. I think there should be a proper lead-in time where people can work out which is the most effective, the cheapest solution for them. That it has to be fair. It can't be the profiteering we're seeing here. And finally, and most importantly, that families, poorer families, larger families with young children who will have something like, if you have 2 children under 3, you'll have something like at least 80 nappies per week going into your bin. It will put a huge additional cost on these families which they cannot afford to pay. There must be a fair and equitable waiver system.
Thanks, Deputy Paul Murphy.
So I got home last night after dealing all day with people contacting me about this price gouging that is going on, and I had an innocuous letter from Thornton's, which informed me that from the 1st of July 2016 a weekly service fee of €2 will be charged to my Thornton's account in addition to any lift charges. It neglects to say, of course, that that's replacing a €50 annual charge and amounts to more than a 100% increase. And perhaps I should count myself lucky, because I'm not with Greyhound and they have a 200% increase. There's tens of thousands of people getting letters like this. It also includes the fairly ominous sentence that they've decided not to apply a charge to the recycling bin at this time. This is simply a rip-off. That's all it can possibly be described as. It has absolutely nothing to do with recycling. In fact, it's penalising people because they're engaging in recycling, a point that is made by many people who contacted me. Why is this rip-off happening? It's happening because they can. It's happening because of the ministerial order signed by Alan Kelly, which was a parting gift, it seems, to these companies, despite the fact him saying that 87% of people would pay less. In reality, that amount will simply pay more. And it's happening because it's the bitter fruits of privatisation. Because the law of the jungle, as the Greyhound workers experienced, operates in the waste collection industry, and the driving factor for them is profit. Now, it's clear that the government is on the run on this issue because people are mobilising, contacting, pressurising. But the question is, what are you going to do about it? I note that the Taoiseach promised that effectively you would have a very stern talking to the companies. I understand that that's now happening tomorrow. That's not good enough. The Minister is responsible. He's not just a consumer who'll ring up Joe Duffy and have a moan about it, or ring up the company and give out about it. He's responsible. And so the law of the jungle operates. It's not good enough to ask them not to do it. The Minister has to change the regulations. Anything less than that won't be accepted. It's to change the regulations so that the increases are frozen and no more increases above inflation can take place at an absolute minimum. We will be using our private members' time next week to try to get such a motion passed. In particular, I'd say lots of people are very anxious to see that Fianna Fáil would vote in favour of that motion, in line with the words that they've been issuing over the last days. The other point I would make very strongly is that it clearly shows that privatisation has been a disaster for the environment, a disaster for households, a disaster for workers. It underlines the reason to continue to mobilise and protest against water charges and to prevent charges and privatisation. And it points to the need for the immediate reversal of the privatisation of our bin services and for them to go back into the ownership of the Council.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Thomas Brewin.
Well, like other deputies, my own office has been inundated with emails and phone calls of protest at the introduction of these new pay-by-weight rip-off charges being imposed from July 1st next. And of course, as leader of the Labour Party in Dublin City Council in the 1990s, I fiercely opposed the introduction of charges in the first place, because I feared it would lead to the kind of privatised, chaotic, non-competitive market we have now, Minister. Of course, it was Minister Kelly who inaugurated the new crazy pricing regime in statutory instrument number 24 early this year. But as broadcaster Pat Kenny noted this morning, it's beyond belief that there are no maximum lift and flat charges in Article 20 in the 8th schedule, Minister, of that document. Minister Kelly referred to an independent study that he used in order to come up with the 11 cents and the 6 cents. Could you publish that study? And let's have a look at what kind of costing has been involved here. Of course, course, Minister Kelly, in his wisdom, also brought in a charge for the green bin, which I'm glad you reversed. Yet the Greyhound Company, of course, operating in much of Dublin Bay North, have informed households of astonishing so-called service charges of €3.25 a week and grossly inflated black bin charges of 35 cents a kilo and brown bin charges of 23 cents a kilo. Constituents, as Deputy Breed was saying earlier, quickly worked out their new annual standing charges and were shocked to estimate those charges would rise, Minister, by 102% or if paid weekly by 141%, and the black and brown bin lift charges at 300 and 400% respectively of the minimum charges set out in Statutory Instrument 24 leaves many thousands of households paying from 100 to 200% more for their waste collection. And there's little comfort, of course, of switching to other service providers, given the profound lack of competition, as my colleague Deputy Joan Collins said yesterday when she spoke of a cartel operating in this market. Indeed, it was Minister Kelly, the famous Minister Kelly, or the outgoing minister, who talked about only a few months ago about the last chance saloon for waste operators, that he was going to go in and sort them out. But of course, as usual, he did nothing to remotely sort them out. So across the waste market, standing and lift charges, Minister, have skyrocketed. I have complaints from householders who use Thorntons. They're introducing price hikes of 200%. One family with 4 children with Thorntons estimate their bill will rise from €324 to €611. Another family member with disability, it goes from €360 to over €600. An exasperated customer of City Bins estimated his bill will rise by 242%. On the Fingal side of my constituency, of course, Panda have abolished the very convenient tag system and are also introducing increased charges. Now, you spoke about a collaboration, Minister, to the development of waste policy in a statement I think you made yesterday. But in fact, this remains to be seen. How are you going to collaborate? For example, the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission is supposed to be the regulator, but there's been no regulation, there's been no studies, and even SER, that was referred to in the questions earlier on, which is a brutal record in invigilating energy prices, at least does some kind of computation.
Deputy.
So I'd ask you, Minister, immediately suspend that statutory instrument, leave the charges as they are, and then let this House and yourself study what we'll do next.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Barry Cowan.
Minister, as other speakers have said, when Minister Kelly brought forward this proposal in January in the statutory instrument ministerial order, he did so supposedly, he would say, with the best of good intentions, claiming that 87% of bills would be lessened. But based on evidence being supplied and has been relayed here and to many other members throughout the House over the last number of days, that obviously won't be the case. It will be quite the opposite. We've heard of various increases amounting to 100 and 200%. So, as usual, in relation to the same minister whom accused others of environmental treason and the like some weeks ago, what he did was ill thought out and ill conceived, poorly communicated, and left a loophole to allow the sort of price gouging that we've heard about in recent days. The Taoiseach just said this morning, in response to this issue having been raised during leaders' questions, that what was happening wasn't in the spirit of what was brought forward. But unfortunately, you can't lodge spirit. Unfortunately, you can't pay bills with spirit. But what you can do in response to this issue, being raised in the manner in which it is, in response to the way in which the collectors and the companies involved in the collection of waste have price gouged, that you as Minister, and I'm glad to hear other speakers say that you'll be meeting with the collectors tomorrow, and I welcome that. I think it's important that you do. I think you should also meet with the local authorities, one of the licensing authorities for such waste collection licensing, with the view to informing them that the loophole that exists to allow this will be closed. Make no mistake about that, because it has to be closed. And you have to get back to the so-called spirit of the legislation or of the order that was passed by Minister Kelly, insofar as there should be some reward for those whom seek to lessen the load, to lessen their waste, to engage in recycling, and whom can get to a system whereby what they get is what was promised and what was expected. And anything less than that will mean nothing, only the emergence of an Irish water type saga that we've seen over the last number of years. And I don't want to get into the rights and wrongs of that and to the way in which that was handled and how ill conceived and ill thought out and ill prepared that was. But I think there's a simple opportunity. I think there's a simple opportunity here for you as Minister with responsibility in this area to immediately meet with these to immediately seek to resolve this issue and to come back to the House next week with a resolution which will meet with our approval and ultimately with those that we represent, whom by association, as I've said on numerous occasions, give us all the privilege of being here to represent, with no monopoly for anybody in relation to any constituent they represent.
Thanks, Deputy. Minister to respond.
First of all, can I thank the deputies for raising the issue today. It's clearly a very big issue, and that's evident by the number of people both on the government side as well as the opposition side who have what I regard as very genuine concerns in relation to what's being proposed in terms of charging from individual companies. Can I say that when I became Minister, this was an issue that had clearly got some attention by the previous government and by the previous Minister. In defence of Minister Kelly, I think what he was doing here in relation to requiring a pay-by-weight element to bills for refuse collection was the right approach. It was an approach that was based on the polluter pays principle, whereby people who manage their waste in a responsible manner should be rewarded and save money by doing that. The only difference of opinion that I had with the previous approach was in relation to the so-called green bin element, whereby I didn't think it was appropriate to have a pay-by-weight charge at all, even though the proposal was a very low charge for the green bin, because I didn't want any disincentive in terms of recycling material, which I think it would have been perceived as if there was any charge there. What's happened since the regulation was signed is that in recent days we have seen the new proposed charges from individual companies, and as householders are actually adding up what it's going to cost them on the back of those proposed charges, many people are alarmed at the potential increases that they may face. As far as I'm concerned, that is not what was intended with this statutory instrument, and it's my job to ensure that what was intended by this statutory instrument is actually followed through on. And I am meeting the companies tomorrow. I would meet them even earlier, but I'm in Belfast this evening and in Derry tomorrow. But when early tomorrow evening, I will meet with the companies concerned. And I agree with some of you that have said what we should not rely on here is some kind of voluntary adoption of the spirit of the SI. We need to reassure people that the government is acting in their interests, and at the same time allowing companies to operate in a commercial and sensible manner, in the spirit of a new SI, which is to change the way in which people are charged for waste, to reward them for responsible management of waste, to take compostable material out of a black or a grey bin and put it into a brown bin and therefore pay less per weight, to take plastics and paper out of a general waste bin and put it into a recyclable bin and be rewarded for that in terms of their overall bills. That is the thinking behind this, and that is what we need to ensure happens. And if that means looking at new regulations that we will introduce next week, so be it. And if it means looking at interventions in terms of regulation or management around charges for a period of time to ensure that we adopt a new charging regime that households accept makes sense for the environment and for themselves in terms of bills, well then that's what we're going to do. And I'm not saying that's straightforward, and I don't want to prescribe today how that's going to be done. I want to talk to the industry about that, and I want to have a respectful conversation, but I can tell you we will be insistent as a government, and I will be, that we are not going to have 200% increases or 100% increases or 70% increases in bin charges in households that are producing similar amounts next year to what they've been producing for the last 12 months.
Thanks, Minister.
That's not acceptable. There were a lot of speakers here,
sure.
so
well, I'm governed
surely
by
I have an opportunity to be able to
You can't
respond.
go back. You will have a second bite at the chair.
But can I just say, a number of complaints have been made to the Competition and Consumer Protection Agency and our department is interacting with the agency to follow through on those complaints and make sure that they're responded to appropriately. But the core issue here is, undoubtedly next week there will be a debate on this issue in this House. A number of parties will be proposing that, and that's good. My understanding is that there will be a debate in the Shannon as well. I think Sinn Féin are using their private members' time next week on that. I hope by that point in time we will have clarity in terms of the government's thinking as to the most appropriate way to respond in the interest of the environment and in the interests of households. Vulnerable households, the kind of households that Deputy O'Dowd has raised concerns about, that may have a lot of young children, or may have a member of the family that may have a disability, that may be incontinent, or an elderly person. We do not want to be punishing any family that for genuine reasons has to deposit wastes in black or grey bins.
Thanks, Minister.
And so we will have that conversation tomorrow with the industry, and I hope we'll be able to find a way forward that this House can agree to next week.
You will have another opportunity to come back in. So, Deputy John Kerr.
Minister, thank you for your contribution, but it really didn't answer the specific question I asked you. And the concern we all have is that we've been getting notifications from the beginning of June indicating the new charging regime, and nobody has been monitoring it until individuals themselves have come to various deputies to highlight the issue. Now, this scheme is due to kick in the 1st of July. And the specific proposal and the specific request I have for you is, will you suspend the scheme until a new and acceptable charging regime is introduced? This is hanging over people, and as we speak, that in 2 weeks' time they're going to be paying something grossly different. In relation to the Taoiseach talked about competition and so forth. One of the companies that were mentioned here by name today are actually charging an additional €50 registration fee for new customers. This is not consumer friendly at all, and the whole scheme of charging needs to be reviewed. But in the first instance, my specific request to you before and is again, will you suspend the scheme until a point in time comes that we can have an agreement on an appropriate charging scheme that does do what you wanted to do, which is increase the recycling and diversion from landfill.
Thanks, Deputy, for your conciseness. Deputy Breed Smith.
Delighted to hear what you've just said, Minister, that you're talking about a statutory instrument that we will have in place rather than relying on the spirit of the existing statutory instrument. And the sooner you can do this, the better, because I think this is absolutely vital. But I'd like to add to it that we also need to take control of what you call, or what the statutory instrument called, the minimum cost of pay by weight. Because what these companies will do, and I make no mistake about it, this is a vicious, competitive, mafia-type dominated industry. These companies will push up the price of pay by weight in order to maximise their profits, where they're going to lose out if we control the service, the annual service charge. And I think we should control the annual service charge at no more than CPI, Consumer Price Index levels. So, but we also then have to say that what was set in the statutory instrument as a minimum price per weight on each of the types of bins now has to become the maximum price. Because if we don't, they will compensate themselves and their profit rate by increasing that, and that is the next big danger. Secondly, I'm delighted that you have mooted the idea of reintroducing a waiver for hard-pressed people with disabilities, large families, issues of poverty, etc. This is absolutely crucial, and we should absolutely be looking at that. Why, in the name of God, we let this service go into private hands in the first place is baffling. We should now start campaigning to take it back into municipal control and ownership.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thanks very much. Minister, I'm glad that you are meeting with them tomorrow, but I do think you need to be very strong and hard with these, because it's very clear that there's a cartel operating here, and between all the different companies, they are setting these prices because they're all very similar. The prices are all very similar across the board. So I think we've all been opposed to cartels. And I also want to say to you, Minister, that our Sinn Féin senators are submitting a motion to the Chair of the Senate to annul this legislation next week, of course. But I hope yourself, your party, Fianna Fáil, Labour and all the independents will support our motion and annul the regulation and stop these increased prices. You know, Minister, You've mentioned about introducing a waiver, and I remember in the past when all the waivers were introduced in Dublin City Council, and it was a sop to get it to privatise that whole service. So it's not going to wash with us that the waiver at some stage the companies will try and get rid of it. We need something more permanent. We need to deal with these companies, and ideally we should be putting this service back to the local authorities.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Fergus O'Dowd.
We need a regulator to examine the books so that the prices that they're saying or what it's costing would due diligence would be done on that. I'd also welcome very much what the Minister is saying. His firm and effective action, I believe it will be. I welcome his comments on a hardship scheme or a waiver scheme. I would direct him to a report of the Ombudsman, I think it was 2007 or 2006, where they recommended such a scheme at that time. And I feel that the way forward is by looking after particularly those who are least able to pay. And I would ask the Minister to look again at the statistics which he's been presented with as a fait accompli after he took office in relation to who will be paying more. If it's families greater than 6, which is what we've been told, I don't believe that, Minister, and I think you need to really do due diligence on that, and that those who are paying more for reducing more just doesn't make sense, and we've got to deal with these guys once and for all, and I believe you are the person to do that.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thank you. I think the way this issue has evolved is quite instructive. It's quite instructive about the weak position of the government, the fact that it's a minority in here, but also I think it's quite instructive about the fact that you are dealing with a different set of ordinary people out there, of working class people. You're dealing with a set of people who have just managed to force the previous government and this government back on a major issue for them, which is the water charges. People who are feeling confident and aren't prepared to lie down. And I would urge the Minister to bear that in mind, that anything that allows the companies to continue to increase the charges in whatever way, be it through the standing charge or the way charges, will not be acceptable to people. You will be met next week by a significant protest in Tallaght. I understand you're coming to South Dublin County Council, a protest at 2 o'clock there on Monday, and a significant protest outside the Dail on Tuesday at 7 p.m, demanding that the rip-off stops, but also that the privatisation is reversed.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Thomas Prue.
Thanks, Cahill. Well, hopefully this means the Minister's response that there will be a suspension of Standing Order 24 and that those price increases, pay-by-weight increases, as they've been presented to us, won't proceed. And can I just ask you, is it possible to make this study that Minister Kelly apparently did in relation to this, make it available to Dáil Éireann, and also to examine the whole issue of maximum charges in this regard? And can I ask you about the role again of the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission? I mean, is this Commission going to be the regulator? There's no regulation, as the last Minister said, the last chance saloon, a chaotic market situation. Can I just also ask you, will you consider legislation to restore the tendering, Minister, to restore tendering by district licences and therefore allow, say, local authorities, if they wish, to come forward and also, in other words, to compete for that licence and to, in other words, get rid of privatisation and allow local authorities to get back into this critical utility service.
Thank you, Deputy Barry Cowan.
Thank you, Cahill. Can I welcome, respect and appreciate the Minister's initial response to this issue that has been raised, and confirm that you will amend the order, that you will close the gap that allows this price gouging that we've seen, that you will introduce waiver systems, that you will reward those whom improve the recycling element and who participate in the way in which the proposal was intended, that they reciprocate, that they would be rewarded by having a bill that is less than what they had this time last year in relation to the same issue. And as Deputy Curran has said, in the event of you not being able to provide the necessary amendments by next week, that you will commit at that stage to inform the House that you will suspend the order until such time as you can present an alternative proposal that meets with the House approval.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister for response.
Great. Well, I hope I'll get the time to answer all those questions if I can. First of all, Deputy Kern's question, which is a fair question, will I suspend the scheme? I think it's too early to give you a straight answer to that today, but I think early next week we'll need to have an answer to that question. I do want to be fair. Some companies haven't even published their new charging systems yet. So I want to have an opportunity to meet the companies involved and the representative body before I decide what needs to be done. In terms of saying things like the whole scheme needs to be changed and be reviewed, I mean, that's exactly what's just happened. Right? We've just reviewed the whole charging system for waste to introduce a pay-by-weight, which actually, you know, every environmentalist in the country would accept as a good thing as long as it's managed properly and as long as it's introduced in a way that balances the bill properly and as long as it's not abused and used as an opportunity to increase income or increase margins for companies. So I am committed to a pay-by-weight approach. I think that setting the maximum and minimum as the same number, in other words, just setting the pay-by-weight charge, I don't think that actually makes a lot of sense, I have to say. I think that some households will want a very significant portion of their bill as pay-by-weight with a small standing charge, and other households would rather a much higher standing charge and the bare minimum in terms of pay-by-weight, depending on what kind of household type you have. But we need to maximise the incentive where possible to compost waste, to recycle waste, to reduce and reuse waste as much as possible. That's the whole purpose of this. We're not doing it for any other reasons apart from a genuine environmental progressive reason. Well, the economics of it are...
One voice, please, Deputy.
Sorry, I mean, pay-by-weight has been introduced all over Europe, in different countries and in different regions. And, no, let me finish, please. And pay-by-weight has been introduced in Ireland as well. And we have looked at the impact of that on the way in which people manage and handle waste. And it's been positive from an environmental perspective. The issue here is nobody in this House, apart from maybe some small number of people, but very few people in this House, had an issue with this until they saw the new charges that were being proposed.
Deputy,
so the issue
Minister,
here,
you're seeing the dangers of going well beyond your time now, so because you're beyond
well, we
2 minutes.
can't have a situation where the opposition all get
well, they're the rules.
Their full time, and they're asking me for answers, and I don't have the
Minister,
time to give
I'm just following the rules. Okay. So, Minister, if you could conclude, please. Deputy, please. Minister, to conclude.
Sorry, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Cahirlach. So can I say my approach is about trying to ensure that we have a new system of paying for waste that actually benefits the householder in terms of rewarding good practice around conservation and good management of waste, and also ensures that we don't allow any company to use that change in system and the confusion that may come with that change to increase their margins or to unfairly increase charges. And that will be the basis of the discussion that I will have tomorrow. And I look forward to coming back to this House next week and having a detailed discussion on it. I hope to have proposals by then for people to think about and hopefully support. I think the point that's made by Deputy O'Dowd in relation to a need for a regulator, I think needs serious consideration, because the Consumer Protection and Competition Commission is really about just ensuring that there is competition in the market, as opposed to actually managing what is appropriate in terms of regulated pricing. So it is a little different. I understand the points that some people make around being suspicious and sceptical and critical of privatisation. In my view, privatisation can be a good thing because it can and should be supporting competition, innovation, choice for consumers, more efficiency, and so on. And that is what we need to ensure actually benefits householders here in terms of waste management, as opposed to anything else. And that is what we need to ensure actually benefits householders here in terms of waste management, as opposed to anything else. But my job,
Minister?
My job
okay.
is and I'll conclude on this.
Thank you.
And thank you for the extra time. My job in the next few days is to ensure that the significant concern and stress and heat that's been created around this issue can be dealt with by government and by me, and the start of that conversation will be tomorrow with the industry, and we'll work through the weekend to come up with a sensible proposal. I think it's unfortunate, Deputy Murphy, that there's a large protest being planned.
I think we should conclude now, Minister.
It's actually unusual that a minister with responsibility for local government chooses to actually go to speak to councils, hear what they have to say, and I've already done that with three
I'm calling a halt to this. Topical issues are concluded. Minister, thank you for your time and thanks for attending. The House is adjourned until 2 p.m. next Tuesday. Thanks, Deputies.